I knew something was off the second I saw the orange spray paint on my lawn. It was early April when I walked out to get the mail and noticed the mark's bright, obnoxious lines that crept 3 feet into my yard. I followed them with my eyes, all the way to the edge of the empty lot next door. That's when I saw her, Cynthia Templeton, the HOA president, 50-something, tight perm, clipboard surgically attached to her hand. She was barking orders at a couple of contractors while sipping a caramel latte like she owned the block, which she didn't, despite what she thought. "Hey, Cynthia," I called out, stepping over the paint lines. "Why are there markings all over my lawn?" She turned around slowly like I was interrupting something sacred. "Victor Ramsey," she said, as if my name left a sour taste in her mouth. "We've already had the property surveyed. The lines are accurate. The HOA board approved construction of our new community clubhouse. It'll be a beautiful addition to our neighborhood." I laughed. "You're building the clubhouse here, on my property?" She gave me that classic Karen smile, tight-lipped and condescending. "According to our records, the association owns this corner. You might want to check your deed again." I didn't need to. I already knew the truth. I'd bought this house 5 years ago, and I had the survey from when I closed. That corner lot was part of my backyard, technically unfenced, but still mine. I've already checked, and I'm telling you now that land is mine. You build anything on it and it's trespassing. Cynthia didn't even flinch. "Well, if that's how you feel, take it up with the board." I did. That night, I showed up to the HOA meeting with a folder full of documents, the original plat map, the survey, property tax records, all showing that the lot was mine. I laid them out on the table in front of the board. "I'm warning you now," I said, trying to keep my temper in check. "If you move forward with construction, I'll pursue legal action." Cynthia barely glanced at the papers. "Victor, the board has already reviewed the situation. Your documents are outdated. The HOA claims this land now. We've already secured funding and permits. Construction begins next week." I looked around the room, but the other board members just stared at their hands. No one wanted to challenge Cynthia. I was the only one with a spine, apparently, so I did what any decent guy would do. I hired my own surveyor. 3 days later, I had a fresh report confirming everything I'd said. My property. No question. I sent Cynthia a certified letter with the new survey attached. I kept the receipt. I even installed a small camera facing the lot, just in case they tried anything shady. They did. Exactly 1 week later, I came home to find bulldozers in my yard. The foundation was already being poured. Half the workers didn't even speak English, and the foreman just shrugged when I told him to stop. I called the cops. They came, but without a court order, they wouldn't intervene. That's when I knew this was war. By Saturday morning, my yard looked like a construction site from a TV show. Rebar, cinder blocks, scaffolding, the whole circus, and not a single person cared that it was happening on property they didn't own. I stood at the edge of the mess, arms crossed, watching 2 workers haul in wooden beams like I wasn't even there. The camera I'd set up earlier had already captured 3 full days of activity, neatly time-stamped and backed up to the cloud. I didn't bother yelling this time. That ship had sailed. Cynthia had made one thing clear. She wasn't relying on facts, she was relying on no one stopping her. So I called an attorney, my cousin's husband, Darren, who specialized in property law. We weren't close, but I knew he owed me a favor from years back when I bailed him out of a nightmare-moving job. He showed up at my house the next day in a suit that didn't match his sneakers and a duffel bag full of legal pads. "Let me guess," Darren said, setting his bag down on my kitchen table. "They're banking on you not having the stomach or money to fight this." "They're wrong," he grinned. "Good. Because this is going to get messy." We spent the next 6 hours drafting a cease and desist, complete with the surveyor's report, footage from the camera, and notarized copies of my deed and title to the land. Darren filed it with the county clerk's office before noon Monday and hand-delivered a copy directly to the HOA's mailbox. Within 48 hours, we had our first response. Not from the HOA, but from their law firm, a polished outfit out of Fort Lauderdale that clearly cost more per hour than my mortgage. Their reply was smug, full of vague legalese and references to something called easement reinterpretation, which Darren promptly tore apart like tissue paper. "They're stalling," he said, highlighting phrases in neon orange. "Trying to drag this out until the foundation's done. Once that slab's poured, they'll argue that removing it would be a financial hardship to the community. They think they can steal my land by planting concrete on it. They're counting on you backing off, but you won't." Darren flipped the letter shut. "Because we're going to court." While he prepped the civil suit, I made a few moves of my own. First, I went to City Hall and requested the building permits under the Freedom of Information Act. I had to wait 3 hours for a clerk named Brandon to dig them up, but when he finally slid the papers across the counter, I knew I had something. The permit listed the parcel number as belonging to the HOA. But it wasn't the parcel where the clubhouse was being built. They had submitted an application for the neighboring lot, the one actually owned by the association. The construction crew had simply started building on mine instead. I took a photo of the documents, emailed a copy to Darren, and went straight to the zoning commission. The woman behind the desk wore glasses on a chain and looked like she'd been dealing with bureaucratic nonsense for decades. "They're building on the wrong parcel," I told her, "and they submitted fraudulent paperwork to get the permit." She peered over the frames of her glasses. "You have documentation." I handed her the printed permit and my survey. She studied them silently for a minute, then picked up her phone. By the end of the day, a city inspector had issued a stop work order. They slapped a bright red sticker on the construction site, and the workers were gone before sunset. But Cynthia wasn't. She showed up on my doorstep at 9 the next morning, wearing oversized sunglasses and a scarf like she was trying to avoid paparazzi. "You really went to the city," she said before I could even say hello. "You built on my land. We had every reason to believe no, you didn't. You had reason to check and you didn't, or worse, you did and ignored it." She shifted her weight, growing more agitated. "This was supposed to be a community space. You're the only one making this difficult." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You filed permits for the wrong lot. You trespassed. You poured a foundation on land you don't own." "That's not a mistake, it's fraud." For a moment, she didn't respond, then her voice dropped into a serious tone. "You're going to make a lot of enemies, Victor. People are already talking. Let them talk. I've got the law, the footage, and the land." "What have you got?" She stared at me for a long moment, then turned and walked away. That afternoon, Darren filed for a temporary injunction. The court granted it immediately, barring the HOA from stepping onto the property. We posted signs around the site, and I replaced the single camera with 4 more real ones, not the fake plastic domes Cynthia had used on the clubhouse lot. By the end of the week, the construction crew was gone for good. But the damage was far from over. Word spread fast. Neighbors started asking questions why the build had stopped, why the HOA wasn't saying anything. I didn't need to say much. I handed them the public records and let the truth do the talking. By the time the court hearing rolled around, half the neighborhood had already turned on Cynthia. But the real bombshell didn't land until Darren subpoenaed the HOA's internal communications. That's when it got criminal. Buried in a chain of emails between Cynthia and one of the board members was a single line that changed everything. "If we start early on Ramsey's lot, the city won't notice until we're too far along to stop. He's a single homeowner, he'll fold." The judge didn't like that. Not one bit. Cynthia tried to argue that the email was taken out of context, but the timestamps, the forwarded permits, and the surveyor's notes told a different story. The judge ruled in my favor. The HOA had to not only remove the foundation and restore the land to its original condition, but also pay damages, including legal fees. But it didn't stop there. The city's building department opened a formal investigation. Fraudulent permits and unauthorized construction weren't just civil violations, they were criminal. Cynthia was charged with falsifying documents and misuse of association funds. She was escorted out of the next HOA meeting by a city official. As for the clubhouse, it never got built. At least not on my land. I stood on my lawn a month later, grass receded and the foundation torn out, watching as a removal crew packed up the last of the debris. Darren stood beside me, sipping iced tea from a mason jar. "You know," he said, "you technically own the most expensive pile of dirt in the neighborhood right now." I nodded. "And I plan to keep it that way." The HOA tried to save face with a newsletter blaming logistical setbacks, but no one bought it. Half the board resigned within a month. The rest were voted out during the emergency election. Cynthia. She moved out 2 weeks after her sentencing. Her house sold under market value to a young couple with 2 pit bulls and zero tolerance for HOA nonsense. Funny how quickly things change when people stand up for themselves. The first time I saw the inside of the HOA's financial ledger, I nearly dropped my coffee. It was a Tuesday morning when Darren called and told me to stop by his office. He just received the court-ordered disclosure from the HOA's treasurer, 3 years of internal financial documentation that Cynthia had fought tooth and nail to keep sealed. I figured we'd find some overbilling or sloppy accounting at worst. What we found instead was a paper trail of misappropriated funds so reckless and deliberate it made my head spin. "You're going to want to sit down," Darren said, spreading the documents across his desk. He jabbed a highlighter at a column of figures. They funneled over $30,000 from the reserve maintenance fund directly into the clubhouse project. That money was earmarked for roofing, sidewalk repairs, and sewer inspections. "Wait," I said. "They used mandatory dues for the clubhouse, without a vote. Worse. They disguised the transfers under infrastructure development. That's why no one noticed. It wasn't just unethical, it's embezzlement." I stared at the numbers, my stomach twisting. How is that even possible? Aren't there checks and balances? There were. Cynthia had them removed last year through a bylaw amendment that barely passed. And get this, she used proxy votes. More than half of them came from properties owned by a shell company registered under her nephew's name. I leaned back, jaw tight. So she built a fake voting block to push through rule changes, then used those rules to siphon money into a project she started on stolen land. And she left a digital footprint the size of a marching band, Darren said, tapping his laptop. "We've got emails, transaction logs, and a signed memo she wrote authorizing the transfers. I've already forwarded everything to the county prosecutor." By Friday, the local news had picked up the story. A reporter showed up at my door with a camera crew and a clipboard full of questions. I gave them the basics: how I'd spotted the construction on my land, how I'd fought it in court, and how the HOA's crimes had unraveled like a pulled thread. I avoided theatrics, just stuck to facts, but the fallout was immediate. That weekend, an emergency meeting was held in the community center. Not the half-built clubhouse, which now looked like a grave marker for Cynthia's career, but the old rec hall 2 streets over. I didn't plan on attending until I got a call from my neighbor, Evelyn, the retired nurse who lived across the street. "You should be there," she said. "People are finally ready to hear the whole story." So I went. The hall was packed, standing room only. I walked into a wall of murmurs, a few nods, and more than one surprised face. The board, what was left of it, sat at a folding table in the front. The treasurer, Mark, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. Cynthia's chair sat empty, pushed back slightly like someone had just left it in a hurry. Mark stood up, cleared his throat, and addressed the crowd. "We've made some serious mistakes," he began. "We trusted someone who abused that trust, and now the association is facing a full audit, a criminal investigation, and potential bankruptcy." Murmurs turned to gasps. One resident in the back let out a whistle. He went on. "We've spoken with legal counsel and we're cooperating fully with the authorities. Effective immediately, all construction on the clubhouse is permanently halted. The site will be cleared and the funds will be returned, what remains of them. Someone shouted, "What about our dues?" "Where's the rest of it?" Mark looked pale. "Roughly 70% of the reserve fund is gone. The rest is locked in litigation." I stepped forward before the room could explode. "I've got something to add," I said, addressing the crowd. "When I started this, I wasn't trying to bring down the board. I just wanted my land back. But once I saw what they were hiding, I couldn't ignore it." A few heads nodded. People were listening now. "I've submitted all the documentation to the city and the county. The prosecutor has enough to press charges, real ones, not just fines. There's a grand jury hearing scheduled for next month." The room fell silent. Then Evelyn stood up. "Victor saved all of us. If he hadn't fought back, they would have built that thing and drained us dry." Someone else added, "He did what the board should have done in the first place. He told the truth." It wasn't applause exactly, but the mood turned. People weren't angry anymore. They were focused, ready to clean house. Within 2 days, recall petitions started circulating. By the end of the week, every remaining board member had either resigned or been voted out. A new temporary board was appointed, made up of volunteers, Evelyn among them. They asked me to serve too, but I declined. My war was over. I just wanted peace. But it wasn't quite finished yet. The county prosecutor, a steely woman named Marisol Ortega, called me in to testify before the grand jury. I brought every document Darren and I had collected, including the footage from my camera showing the trespassing and construction. I didn't need to embellish anything. The facts were damning enough. A month later, Cynthia was indicted on 6 felony counts, including wire fraud, misappropriation of funds, falsifying permits, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Her nephew was charged too, along with 2 former board members who'd helped cook the books. She tried to play victim, of course, claimed she was sabotaged, manipulated, misunderstood, but the evidence buried her. When the trial finally began, the prosecution opened with the line. She built a clubhouse on stolen land, then tried to cover the foundation with lies. She was sentenced to 4 years, with parole eligibility after 2. Meanwhile, the association underwent a full forensic audit. The new board found more than just financial abuse. They uncovered kickbacks from vendors, inflated contracts, even a landscaping company that had been billing for work never performed. That one belonged to Cynthia's brother-in-law. Reforms came fast. Proxy voting was eliminated. All financial decisions over $5,000 now required community-wide approval. Meeting minutes were made public. And for the first time in years, the HOA began operating like what it was supposed to be, a support structure, not a fiefdom. As for my land, the court's ruling stood. The HOA was forced to restore every square inch, reseed the grass, and install a privacy fence around the perimeter. I added a small sign near the edge that read, "Private property, no exceptions." Funny thing, no one ever questioned it again. I spent the next few months helping my neighbors navigate the new system. I didn't hold office, but I shared the documents, the process, the steps Darren and I took. People listened. They were tired of being pushed around, tired of fear disguised as order. One evening, as I was watering the yard, Evelyn walked by with her rescue beagle, Waffles. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" she said, adjusting her sun hat. "Quieter," I said. "In a good way." "We're planting a community garden next to the rec center," she mused. "You should come by sometime. Might be nice to grow something that doesn't involve a legal battle." I chuckled. "I think I've had my fill of digging, but I'll stop by." She started walking off, then turned. "You know, Victor, I don't think Cynthia realized who she was messing with. She thought I'd roll over. She thought you were alone. That stuck with me. Because that's what they always count on: the silence, the apathy, the assumption that people won't stand up. But once someone does, it spreads. Truth has a way of doing that. And sometimes, the only thing it takes to bring down a crooked kingdom is one stubborn homeowner with a camera, a cousin-in-law with a law degree, and a property line they never should have crossed." A week after Cynthia's sentencing, A manila envelope arrived at my door with no return address, just my name and a single word written in bold red pen across the front. Follow up. Inside was a stack of photocopied invoices, 2 flash drives, and a note that simply read, "These weren't included in the audit. You'll want to see for yourself." I took one look at the invoice headers and knew immediately this wasn't over. The files detailed a series of payments made to a private consulting firm, Northwinds Development LLC, to the tune of nearly $60,000. The accompanying contracts were vague, listing services like project evaluation, site integration, and community optimization. But what caught my eye was the address, a rundown mailbox rental in Tampa. No suite number, no office, just a storefront that didn't even offer internet access. I drove out there the next morning. The place looked like it hadn't had a customer since the early 2000s. The clerk didn't ask questions when I showed the company name. All he said was, "Yeah, Box 93, got shut down last month." No forwarding address. When I got back home, I loaded the first flash drive. It was encrypted. The second one wasn't. It contained a folder of scanned receipts, all from high-end restaurants, golf resorts, and hotel bookings. Cynthia's name was on a few of them, but 2 other names stood out, Doug Halpern and Monica Reyes. Both were listed as consultants in the HOA's last quarterly report. I remembered them vaguely from one board meeting. They'd stood near Cynthia, nodding along like hired shadows. I called Darren. He met me within the hour, and this time, he brought a second lawyer, an older man with a thick binder and a badge clipped to his belt. "Victor," Darren said, motioning to the older man, "this is Assistant District Attorney Greg Talcott." He's been following the case since the indictment. Greg didn't waste time. "The second flash drive fills in a lot of blanks. Based on what you've found, we're looking at conspiracy to commit wire fraud, racketeering, and possibly bribery of a public official." I blinked. "Bribery?" Greg tapped the binder. "The building inspector who originally approved the permit. He received a $5,000 consulting fee from Northwinds 4 weeks before the first cement truck showed up. There was no evaluation or inspection logged. Just an approval stamp." Darren looked at me. "If we can prove that bribe led directly to the permit being approved, it opens up a whole new case, one that goes beyond the HOA." We turned everything over to the DA's office. The next morning, officers served warrants to 2 properties in the next county, one belonging to Halpern, the other to Reyes. Both were arrested and charged within 72 hours. The inspector resigned the same day and lawyered up immediately. The fallout triggered a second wave of resignations in nearby HOA boards. Turns out, Northwinds had been operating in at least 3 other developments, using the same playbook: manipulate board elections, funnel dues into consulting, then push through high-expense projects on misrepresented land. But in our neighborhood, the damage had already been scrubbed clean. The clubhouse foundation was gone. The land had been professionally regraded, reseeded, and restored. The fence Cynthia once fought tooth and nail to avoid approving now stood tall, freshly painted, and lined with solar lights. I'd added a garden bed along the inside with sunflowers and rosemary, just to keep things feeling grounded. One afternoon, while watering the plants, I spotted a pair of kids tossing a football near the edge of the property where the clubhouse was supposed to be. One of them tripped and fell, landing just outside the fence line. His friend ran up to help him, and they both looked over at me, unsure whether they were in trouble. "You're good," I called. "Just watch the rosemary." They nodded and kept playing. Later that week, Evelyn invited me to the first official neighborhood gathering since the new board had taken over. It was being held in the old rec center again, but this time, the doors were open, the lights were on, and the snack table wasn't locked behind a keycard system. I showed up a few minutes early and found Evelyn arranging folding chairs with a few other volunteers. She waved me over. "We're drafting a new community charter," she said, handing me a clipboard. "No more closed-door meetings, no more unapproved spending. Every resident gets a vote." No exceptions. I scanned the first few pages. It was clear, simple, and most importantly enforceable. "Looks solid," I said, handing it back. "We borrowed a few of Darren's suggestions," she added, "and your idea about rotating board seats. That's in there too." The meeting started promptly at 6. For the first time, everyone seemed engaged, not just sitting through it, but actually participating. Questions were answered without deflection. Decisions were voted on openly. People even laughed. Doug Halpern and Monica Reyes were both still awaiting trial. Cynthia had filed an appeal, but the state rejected it. Her sentencing stood. The inspector who took the bribe was disbarred and fined. Northwind's development officially dissolved, its assets seized pending restitution. As for me, I didn't run for the board, but I stayed involved. I helped review vendor contracts, advised on zoning questions, and made sure every document, every single one, was stored in a shared public drive with resident access. One evening, around dusk, I was sitting on my porch when a silver sedan pulled up slowly in front of my house. A man I didn't recognize stepped out, holding a small box. "Victor Ramsey?" he asked. "Yeah," he handed me the box. "From the county clerk's office." "Certified delivery." I opened it after he'd left. Inside was a rolled document sealed with a blue ribbon. A deed transfer. The parcel once disputed, once marked with orange spray paint and stolen under the guise of community development, now officially registered in my name again. This time with a court seal and a note from the judge herself. Permanent title confirmed, no future claims permitted. I framed it, not out of pride but as a reminder of what happens when you let power go unchecked, of what communities lose when they stop asking questions, of how fragile trust becomes when it's treated like a tool instead of a responsibility, and of how quickly it can all be taken unless someone stands up. Evelyn stopped by the next day with a basket of tomatoes from the community garden. She looked at the frame on my wall and raised an eyebrow. "Just in case they forget," I said. She smiled. "They won't. Not after this." She was right. We never had another construction project without a vote. No mysterious consultants, no unexplained fees. The HOA meetings became something people actually looked forward to. And kids still played football near the fence, careful not to trample the rosemary. Sometimes, I'd catch a neighbor walking past the edge of the property, glancing at the fence with a quiet nod, not of approval, but of recognition. They remembered what happened. They remembered who tried to bury the truth in concrete, and they remembered that the clubhouse never belonged to them. It belonged to me. Because no matter how hard they tried to rewrite the lines, the truth had deeper roots, and I made sure they stayed planted.